Welcome to the Professional Development Workshop on the topic East versus West, educating mainland Chinese learners in foreign universities. Let me introduce myself. I've almost over 20 years of corporate leadership and senior management experience in organizational development, strategic, and change management. I've served as the Senior Vice President, Strategic Transformation and Business Development, Head Director of Academic Affairs and Business Development for Asia Pacific, thereafter as a Chief Executive of a global leadership and organizational learning consulting firm before transiting as a researcher and educator. I have a PhD with distinction in business and management, minoring in learning culture and organizational learning science. I could consider myself as a well-established individual in the field of leadership, organizational learning, management education, learning culture, and innovation. I was instrumental in transforming and implementing the flipped classroom pedagogy and team-based learning in the course that I led. I've received multiple competitive school, university, and national level research grants and awards. I've published in management education, learning culture in multidisciplinary context, and internationalization of business education. My latest academic book with Springer, titled Educating Mainland Chinese Learners in Business Education, Pedagogical and Cultural Perspectives, Singapore Experiences, is available to the academic community, research scholars, and educators who may be keen to read the new insights, findings, and analysis, as well as recommendations. Today's presentation's agenda, I'll be focusing on the following. Confucianism is a more tradition generally rooted in Chinese culture and nurtured by Confucius and Confucians. Conventional educational approaches have remained largely unaffected because the strength of the philosophy of Confucius is closely linked to education and learning. The Chinese learner has become a major focus due to the rapid increases in the number of mainland Chinese students in both the Anglophone as well as East Asian countries. Despite rapid internationalization of education and workplaces, the views on Chinese learners remain largely based on stereotypical and outmoded assumptions. Offering quality education entails: number one, a good understanding of cultural aspects. Number two, effective methods of knowledge transfer integrated with optimal learning processes. Narrow thinking and lack of attention to the real challenges and dilemmas of cultural practice can cause misunderstanding and inhibit opportunities for the development of innovative and generative ways of teaching and learning. Cultural differences integrate educational differences. As a result, learning styles across educational systems can vary. Group achievement may be considered far more important than individual accomplishment in some cultures. Cultural conditioning is reflected in the learning style preferences of students. Language and communication, learning styles, and previous experiences can all add to the challenges of international students who pursue Western-based education. The primary difficulty arises from the variance in the second language abilities of students, which may immediately place international students at a disadvantage. Stereotypes of Chinese culture of learning. Firstly, rote learning. There are two key aspects that we can talk about to cope with stresses of learning, to cope with the need to excel academically to pass examinations. Secondly, phase and self-effacement, limiting the expression of criticism in order to avoid the individual losing face. Self-effacement is infringed when they are required to have an open discussion in front of a large audience. Third point, maintaining harmony. Mainland Chinese students tend to emphasize harmony in the learning environment and thus do not want to attack or challenge another group's point of view. Fear of failure. The situation is further worsened by the creation of an adverse learning environment with their fear of failure in reaction to invalidation and negative feedback. Power distance. Generally, in a large classroom settings, mainland Chinese students are unwilling to take part in open discussions and thus do not respond favorably during class discussions. Teachers are to decide which knowledge is to be taught and are seen as the sources of authority and power. Mode of knowledge transfer. As the Chinese mainland students prefer and expect close supervision, group-oriented settings will be more suitable. Prefer passive learning, example, lectures, videos, guest speakers, to active learning, case study, classroom discussions, and so on. Despite us knowing and acknowledging the stereotypes of Chinese culture of learning, we could see changes and shifts of the Chinese culture of learning. Culture can be transformed only after a prolonged phase of confrontation, clashes, and conflict between cultural traditions and modernization. Cultural traditions are dynamic and ever developing. Confucianism changed throughout a long history by adapting itself to new political and social demands. Rapid changes in China over the last decade and beyond has influenced and shifted the traditional cultural norms and values which affect the learning behavior of Chinese learners. As a result of change, we could see Chinese learners prefer student-centered to teacher-centered approaches. Less supervision is required from the tutors. Choose to participate in interactive and cooperative learning activities. A study conducted by Rajaram and Bodia in 2011 shows that active instructional techniques, for example, case study, individual research project, group project, and classroom discussions, are perceived to be excellent avenues for quality learning in terms of knowledge and information acquirement. Big changes in China over the past decade have influenced the values of Confucianism. However, social relationships are maintained in Chinese societies through phase, collectivism, harmony, conformity, and power distance. Values that continue to manifest in the learning environments. Firstly, respect for wisdom and knowledge. The authority of teachers, who are the purveyors of knowledge, should not be challenged. Preservation of harmony. Individuals should conform to collective rather than developing distinctive values and beliefs. Thirdly, concern for faith. An individual is required to behave properly so that they will not bring shame to themselves and people to whom they are related. Let's now look at the applicability of Western concepts to China. In general, management theories from the West originate from American research using examples from companies operating in a very diverse economic, political, and social environments. Hence, some of the recommended strategies of how we could customize to engage these Chinese learners. First, courses must not merely be pre-packaged portfolios or Western management courses. Secondly, varying operating situations of businesses must be taken into consideration. Thirdly, due consideration given to ensure English terms used have the same meaning in a Chinese context. Now, let's reflect on the question, are new generation mainland Chinese students participating in classrooms? On one perspective, we see mixed views on students' involvement in classroom activities. Sharing of opinions, contributing to discussions, and challenging norms are limited. In contrary, a study in Shanghai shows that students show little difference from their Western counterparts by being active learners and preferring a more interactive relationship with their teachers. On a similar note, research scholars have also acknowledged that Chinese students' learning behavior in general has shifted. Perhaps more acclimatized to participative learning approaches. Now they prefer a more two-way communication style of instruction. Next, let's look at the teacher-student relationship. There's a shift in mainland Chinese students' learning culture, but some fundamental learning behavioral aspects, for example, power distance, still remains, at least till they are subjected to prolonged exposure. There's evidence that shows Chinese students do not think that having their own opinions were important for a good learner. Mainland Chinese students' unwillingness to participate in class can be related to their willingness to submit to authority. It is unusual for mainland Chinese students to put across their disagreements openly to their professors, although they do not acknowledge the information provided blindly. Let's now look at the active versus passive teaching approaches. Mainland Chinese students generally reported that they learned more effectively through active instructional techniques, with the exception of lectures, which is considered as a passive instructional technique. This may be due to the increasing trend and exposure to Western values and lifestyles in the learning and teaching actions of courses back in China. Let's now zoom into the implications and recommendations. Organizational performance is intertwined with students' learning effectiveness, so it is imperative that they acquire knowledge in the most effective manner. Students' ability to perform and deliver tangible results in organizations fundamentally depends on how well the knowledge has been acquired, transferred, habituated by students from their learning processes and outcomes. Some recommended strategies to facilitate participation among mainland Chinese students. First, allow them the opportunity to define their roles at the outset, thus providing them unambiguous instructions. Secondly, allow more time to think about the topics under discussion. For example, long silences in the classroom may not simply be indications that these students are refusing to participate, but that they may be thinking about the answers and require more probing and encouragement from tutors. Thirdly, encourage by giving generous praises and having open acknowledgement to students who attempt to share their opinions or thoughts. Fourthly, incorporate participation as part of the assessment criteria, which will automatically encourage a participative learning culture in the long run. Let's now look at some key takeaways in facilitating these Chinese learners. First, Tutors should be creative and sensitive to students' individual learning needs and adopt different instructional techniques. Secondly, Chinese students prefer passive instructional techniques but do not necessarily learn most effectively or acquire optimal knowledge through them. Thirdly, tutors should not generalize or incline towards adopting a specific cluster or instructional techniques. Finally, no one instructional technique leads to effective learning. Recognition of the varying learners' characteristics is important. Appropriate application of techniques in varying situations based on, for example, learners' prior knowledge, their practical experiences, their maturity level, their cultural values and beliefs are very important before one decides on a mixture of correct instructional techniques to be adopted. To have a thorough evidence-based understanding on this vital and contemporary topic, I strongly recommend you to read my book on educating mainland Chinese learners in business education. The intervention of internationalization in higher education has increased the complexities in teaching and learning rapidly. Mainland Chinese learners are one of the majority profile of students pursuing their studies in well-developed countries like Singapore, US, UK, Australia, and so on. Hence, the next question is to have evidence-based yet pragmatic strategies and guidance required to effectively facilitate high quality and effective learning in a culturally dislocated learning environment. The value proposition of the book are: it provides comprehensive guidance and proposes a practical framework to facilitate effective learning and knowledge transfer. Secondly, it offers readers a deeper understanding of Chinese culture and various aspects of cultural dislocation. Thirdly, it recommends concrete approaches to effectively understanding and engaging with mainland Chinese learners. This book presents strategies and practices for facilitating effective learning for mainland Chinese students in Western-based education regarding, example, the choice of instructional techniques, attention to students' cultural dislocation aspects, comfort, familiarity, and ease of knowledge transfer. It embeds innovativeness at a conceptual level, argues for a holistic and engaged approach to learning effectiveness for mainland Chinese students. We've come to the end of the presentation. I trust you have benefited from the insights and sharing. If you need to reach me regarding the book, scholarly work in this area, or wish to collaborate on the topic of research, you are welcomed to drop me an email as highlighted. Thank you so much for viewing the asynchronous professional development workshop that I've just facilitated. Best wishes in your scholarly work and teaching endeavors. Stay safe and well. Take care. Bye-bye.